To guide us on safeguarding the industry and ourselves from the impact of misinformation, we have Mr. Govindraj Ethiraj.
Thank you very much. Thank you to the Poultry Federation of India for inviting me on the 15th Poultry Knowledge Day. And I am told I have about 25 minutes. I do want to keep it on time and race through as fast because, to use the old cliche, I do stand in between you and lunch. Before I start, just a quick 30-second backgrounder on me. I am basically been a financial journalist. I continue to be one. But fighting misinformation is a mission of sorts for me. I started focusing on this in about 2014-15 and then sort of stepped up with 16-17. The interesting thing that's happened in that period, which you may or may not have noticed, is that the fight against fake news sort of accompanies the growth of mobile phone penetration across the world, but also in countries like India. We've gone from, let's say, 100 million smartphones to about 750, 800 million smartphones today. Smartphones equals internet equals WhatsApp. And that, as you know, is the biggest distributor, end-to-end encrypted, of misinformation today. Including, of course, in countries like India. So there are 4 or 5 things I want to focus on and which sort of lays the ground. And I think it's useful that I've come in later and not earlier, because I think many of the speakers earlier have either showcased the issue or showed how they're responding to it in their own ways. I mean, there are people, there are companies who are obviously bringing this information, bringing the issue into their marketing campaigns, into their brand building campaigns, and therefore obviously addressing the issue at hand, which is the misinformation or the lack of information or lack of information integrity that exists in the marketplace. So I'm not going to focus so much on that. What I'll try and do is point out 3 or 4 things. One is that this is a larger problem. The problem is not just to do with misinformation around the poultry industry. It's to do with misinformation as a problem that's societal, that connects everything. So at Boom Live, and I'm going to go quickly into that, we talk about misinformation across areas. We are talking about communal, social, political, health, medicine, which may include something like poultry and food, and then finally maybe areas like finance and so on. So I'm going to show you a lot of slides, and I'm going to race through that because I just want to give you a sense of what's happening, and only to illustrate the point that you and me are victims on a continuous basis. When we open our WhatsApp messages or any other social platform that we consume or interact with, it's almost like a drip that's attached to your body. It's dripping all the time into your system, and then your mind is obviously getting influenced. So let me go. So we do a lot of things. We are amongst the first fact-checking. Actually, we are the first Indian fact-checking network. We verify something. Okay, so we select something. We trace the source of claim. That could be using technology, or it could be physically calling up someone. So if it was to do with poultry, let's say, we would track down someone, most likely who's sitting in this room, and ask you whether is it true that eggs have this carcinogenic element, or is there some COVID element that's gone into eggs, which of course was a big thing those days. And we write a fact check, which we distribute. So, and I'm going to show you a lot of types of misinformation. But before I do that, on Sunday, as India was playing Australia, which we finally lost, unfortunately, but there was another interesting piece of information, and I won't use the word news, though many news organizations carried it, that started spreading. It said that India has become a $4 trillion economy. Did people here see it? Can you raise your hands? Yes. So that piece of information is complete fiction. Okay, it's fantasy, right? But the interesting thing was a lot of politicians spread it, which I'm obviously not surprised with, but a couple of people in business spread it, which actually shocked me. Because I say, to me, it's very clear as a financial journalist that, GDP is not something that is tracked on a real-time basis. GDP figures the last GDP figures are for 22-23 or the last quarter at best. And maybe you could sort of do some progressive, projection and say, oh, GDP is $4 trillion. But none of the people who at least some of the people who retweeted that clearly should have known that this was complete fiction, but they yet did it. So why do people do this? They do it because they believe in something that they like to believe. And that's really the essence of misinformation, that people spread things because they feel that it is true, not because their rational mind is even questioning it or telling them it's true. The newest phenomenon, of course, and I wanted to start with this slide, of course, is deep fakes, right? Where you will, and there's a lot of that happening, by the way. There are 5 elections going on or starting, including here. And it's fascinating and scary how deep fakes, the use of artificial intelligence is being used in misinformation. Okay, so I'm just going to race through stuff now, okay? So this is an instance of finance, okay, not, let's say, something else. This is where the whole problem started in a way, I mean, where it became clear that misinformation can kill people. We saw a lot of misinformation during COVID. There were two kinds of misinformation. It's interesting. The first was to do with the disease itself and people saying that, you could use cures which were anything from steam inhalation to Ayurvedic cures, none of which were true, none of which were medically certified or acknowledged. And to scams, which also is a reflection of the same problem, which is that people are believing things that they get online. We reach out a lot to police and law enforcement now because they are perhaps the best position to respond to these things. There's a lot of it, so please pay attention because misinformation is not just about a celebrity or something like that. Okay, so there are two, and I've put together slides or images from two kinds. Okay, stories that we've done plus stories that we've seen around the world. Now, and this obviously, and I'm trying to stitch it together by showing how this is a global problem. Misinformation flows freely across the world, particularly in areas where also the consumer or consumption is similar. So if people are consuming eggs, let's say in Western Europe, in the United States, in Australia, or somewhere else in South Asia, then the misinformation that could go with it could also flow into India and could flow out of India as it happens. And I was actually quite surprised that we have actually done more stories on this subject than I would have thought we did. So this is what happened. This obviously you know very well. Poultry farmers were actually killing chickens because of the news that they caused coronavirus, for which there was no medical or technical substantiation. So it's happening all over the world, as you can see. Not poultry, but connected. So the interesting thing that happened around COVID was, I talked about the disease, vaccine misinformation, that, if you take this vaccine, something's going to happen to you, also spread a lot. But the interesting thing is, and I have some reasons for it, but I'm not really getting into it, is that vaccine misinformation was not so much of a problem in India as it was in the Western world. So, either because our India's own vaccine program started rolling out so quickly, and then it was obviously a global standard of sorts because we vaccinated so many people, we used technology because of all of that, or maybe inherently we were sort of resistant to the fact that vaccines can kill, because maybe it goes back to history, the fact that we have adopted vaccines as young people, as children, and used it. So whatever the reason, vaccine misinformation was not a problem in India, but it was a much bigger problem in the West, and there was organized spreading of that. Again, this is a global story, and there is a reason why I'm trying to club this under health, or rather club it with health. And the reason is that because as you look around you, and this is one of the solutions, I know I've been positioned as someone who can help find solutions. I told the organizers the other day, there are no silver bullets, because the problem is too deep, too wide, and too entrenched. And we have to address it at both the supply and the demand side, and I'm going to come to that. But like I said, as long as you understand that you're part of a larger problem, the solution also hopefully will follow. So there's nobody who curates anything, right? So someone can go put up a YouTube video saying something, and people will start believing because they feel like it's true. So here are some of the things that we've collected when it comes to health information, right? So one is monitoring. Let a professional tell you the facts, not the internet. Be transparent. Cite your sources. The part of us. What is it? I mean, the previous speaker, your keynote speaker, Tarun Sridhar, spoke about why or how the industry body has not been doing enough to counter it. And it struck me too that, I remember seeing the National Egg Coordination campaigns about eggs. And I know I'll be revealing my age, but I've also, I met with Dr. B.V. Rao in 2004. And perhaps most of you have not met him, and it's quite likely that most of you here have not met him. But I did, and I was actually interviewing him. I was obviously starting out in the profession, and I was asking questions to which I had obviously no clue, but he gave me the structure of the industry, and it was quite interesting even at that time that how the industry was structured and what the growth sort of prospects were and so on. But to come back to today, we have to tell people what this is about, and you have to do it in an organized way. So obviously some of the companies including who presented here earlier, are incorporating knowledge building into their marketing, and they're doing it obviously because there is a problem of growth or there is a problem of acceptance. But till the industry body does it in a more concerted way, and I'll dwell on that a little more, the problem is not going to get solved. This is how health misinformation is tackled. There are many such initiatives. So there are specific bodies created, so on. So this is what we do, as in you can send us, we have a WhatsApp helpline, and if you send us your forward, there's an automated response, but we are usually checking stuff that, I mean, with a couple of hours delay, and then post. And if we have an answer or if we do a story or a report, then we post that. Okay. So here are the 3 or 4 things that I want to quickly dwell upon. One is, I think, the importance of understanding that there is a larger problem. There are 2 parts to any problem. There is demand and there's supply. I think the demand side is something that gets a little ignored, and I'll come to that in a moment. The supply side, all of this is happening because we are all spreading it to each other. So, when people ask me, what do we do about misinformation? I said the first place you have to start is on your family groups. And attack your uncles and your aunties or your relatives or your friends who are spreading misinformation first. And when I say attack, I don't mean do it aggressively, but gently point out. And we've been saying it for the last couple of years, because if you're not able to convince people in your own groups without getting into a fight, I know fights can start and then it becomes unpleasant. But if you can't convince people in your own group, it's very unlikely that you'll convince people outside. The institutional response I've already talked about, but I'm going to spend a moment on that as well. On the demand side, I think it is important to work with younger and younger people. I think it's important to work on children, because this is about critical thinking. This is about making people understand that you have to ask questions, that you cannot believe everything and anything that you see on the internet, and including, though I am a journalist, including in mainstream media. It's shameful that the 4 trillion story was and continues to be on several mainstream media sites even right now, with some vague sort of questioning and all that, when clearly those mainstream media organizations should have been saying that this is wrong or not carried it at all to start with. So I think it's important to think critically or teach critical thinking or impart critical thinking to younger people or younger children, and that's the only place you can start. If you start today, and people have started already, in 5 or 6 years, we can see the difference. On the supply side, the biggest problem are the platforms. There is no other this thing. There's Google, there's YouTube, there's Facebook, there are a bunch of Indian platforms, there is WhatsApp, of course, there's Instagram, and misinformation, despite everyone's efforts, spreads very fast. The thing that has changed is velocity, and velocity adds veracity, because at the speed at which it goes, you start to believe it. Oh, 100 people have seen it. Oh, thousands of people are circulating it. It must be true. So you have to the extent that you can, you have to attack that. So my recommendation is that try and work with the platforms. Go to Google. I mean, I can at least do some introductions if people are interested here, and talk to them, like the health industry has been doing. Google, in turn, is working with, let's say, hospitals, doctors in the US, in India as well, to create knowledge banks. What they're trying to do is say, okay, we cannot address misinformation in entirety, but let's build knowledge bank and train our algorithms to take you to those knowledge banks when you start searching for something. If you start searching for, let's say, cancer or even a COVID in Hyderabad, chances are that on Google you'll see results relating to either a cancer hospital in Hyderabad or a doctor who treats cancer, or let's say a video which talks about a particular type of cancer, but possibly from Hyderabad or somewhere in India. Okay, so this is what the Google or the platforms are doing, at least the good part of it, to try and address this problem. And I think I would strongly recommend that you work with them. The next part is to really find your partners. Like I said, and this is why I highlighted it in the beginning, this is not your problem alone. This is a poultry industry problem, this is a food industry problem, health industry problem, political problem, and a medical industry problem as well. So if you can somehow figure out how you can join forces, then you will be working on solutions which I'm sure you can come up with on the supply side. And the extension of that is really, who could you work with? And these are just sort of almost random suggestions. I saw that one of the presentations talked about working with influencers. Influencers is tricky territory. Some of it can work, some of it can work against you. You have to be very careful, particularly at this point. But it is a fact that influencers today have a combined reach, or a likely reach, and the ability to influence, which is why they call that, to many more people than traditional advertising would. Could you work with chefs, for example, as a category, who talk about eggs in a knowledge building sense? Could you work with others, let's say health people, who talk about it in an indirect way, because maybe they have the supplemental, let's say, or the nutritional aspects of eggs? And of course, all of this in the digital context, which again has been touched upon by previous speakers, so I'm not going to get into it. So the strategy has to look at two things. One is responding to the problem of misinformation, and the second is to focus on the growth aspect, because finally you want to build your industry and you want to make it bigger. You know, I track inflation numbers a lot, and one of the things that I was asking someone very recently is that, you know, while we saw huge inflation spikes in food, in tomatoes went up to 300 rupees a kilo in September and then crashed to 10 rupees. Farmers were dumping it on streets. Very little or almost nothing happened to the broilers and eggs, if I remember correctly. Broilers for sure, because you can see it in the inflation breakup. And the question is why? I mean, why are food prices rising so dramatically, which of course now they've come down, whereas broilers are not? So obviously the answer is demand. I mean, demand is not rising so much. So why is it not rising? And is all of this partly the reason? Maybe it is. So demand and supply are two critical parts, and both, let me show you a last video if this works. So this is something my colleagues put together. Okay, I think it's jammed. Okay, I'm reaching the end of my presentation in any case. Okay, it's jammed. So so the point was essentially identifying misinformation. These are a couple of young colleagues of mine who put together this video. And the whole idea was to highlight this, that, you know, involve young people, get them interested, go younger, to focus on the demand side. On the supply side, I've already laid out everything. Okay, here it is. Just 43 seconds and then I end. Okay, so just to close, I think it's a battle that we all have to fight. Like I said, you have to start in your family WhatsApp groups. I think Mr. Sridhar mentioned it in the morning as well, that you have to attack it. There is no choice. But yes, don't get unpleasant, because I know all of us get emotional on WhatsApp groups on a bunch of issues, including, of course, politics. But understand always that the problem of misinformation is a larger one, and you have to find allies and you have to work with people, and that way hopefully you will achieve the success that you truly deserve. Thank you very much.